When David runs over a young woman and kills her, the budding friendship between two very different neighbors takes a tragic turn. Welcome back to Movies Explained. Today's film is a thriller from 2022 titled, The Good Neighbor. David Stevens is an American journalist who has been offered a new job in Riga, Latvia by his old friend Grant. After breaking up with his girlfriend, David wants a change in his life and decides to accept the job and fly out to Riga. He is greeted by a company driver who takes him to Grant's house, where Grant is also present to show David around. Grant informs David that his car is in the garage and that he is welcome to use it whenever he wants. The following day he heads to his first day at work where he meets his new co-workers and gets familiar with his new job. Later that evening, David decides to check out the car in the garage but discovers that it won't start. He rings the neighbor's door to borrow a gas canister and is greeted by Robert, a nurse who happens to speak English. He tells David that he was raised in the UK and gives David a canister full of gas. David thanks him and promises to return a full canister. David returns to the garage and pours the gas inside the car, but the car still won't start. As he pops the hood for a look, Robert comes by offering to help. Robert is able to get the car started and together they take the car for a test drive around the city. The following evening, David is bored, so he decides to ask Robert if he would be interested in going out for drinks, to which Robert accepts. They head to a local nightclub where they begin to drink and have a good time. After a few drinks, the two hit the dance floor. At the bar, David meets a British girl named Janine who tells her that she's in Latvia for soul searching. Janine gives David her phone number and leaves, stating that she has to work in the morning. As she leaves, David calls her so she can have his number as well. Shortly after, David and Robert decide to call it a night and head home. On the drive home, David tries to turn on the radio, and as he takes his eyes off the road, Robert screams for David to watch out for the cyclist on the road. Unable to brake in time, David strikes her, throwing her off the bike. When they get out of the car to check on her, they notice that it's Janine, the girl from the club. Robert tries to revive her but is unable to. He gets in the car and screams for David to get in. He informs David that he has been drinking and will go to prison if the police arrive. David is hesitant but eventually gets in the car and the pair take off. The following morning, as Robert heads out for a house call with a patient whose house happens to be next to the site of the accident, he sees that it's filled with police and investigators. Overcome by guilt, David decides to call the police to report the hit and run, but when they answer the phone, he hangs up unable to complete the report and washes Janine's phone number off his arm. At his patient's house, Robert asks if she heard anything last night, and she replies seeing two people speed away in a BMW. As the two are talking, the police ring the bell to question the residents about the hit and run, but Robert answers the door and tells the police that they heard nothing. Meanwhile, at work, everyone is gathered as Grant distributes the assignments. Coincidentally, David is asked to do the story about the hit and run from last night. David heads to the police station where Detective Rain is having a press conference about the hit and run. She informs the press that a taxi driver found the body of a woman who is identified as a 28-year-old by the name of Janina Rafaela and that they have no leads so far. Meanwhile, Robert has decided to get rid of the evidence and takes the BMW and runs it into a lake. After the press conference, David runs to the bathroom to vomit. On his way out, he is stopped by a woman from the press conference. She introduces herself as Janine's sister and requests his assistance in identifying the driver. She also requests that David include a request for witnesses to come forward in his article, to which David agrees and rushes away. At home, he meets with Robert, who informs him about the car and tells David that their stories must be consistent. They agree to say that they went to the club that night and took the train home at midnight. To unwind, Robert decides to take David fishing at a nearby lake. In the morning, David calls the police to report the car stolen but is told that the owner of the car must make the report. Shortly after, his co-worker informs him that he has a visitor. David is surprised to see that it's Vanessa, Janine's sister. They go to a cafe, and Vanessa tries to think of reasons why someone would take that back road. She believes it could have been someone who had been drinking, but David plays it off by telling her that anyone could have taken that back road for any reason and promises to do his best to help her. Later that day, David and Robert return to the same spot to fish again. As David tries to hook the worm, he cuts his finger and it begins to bleed. When Robert asks to see, he sucks the blood off David's finger, which freaks David out. When he asks what he's doing, Robert replies that he's sucking out the infection. The next day at work, Grant informs David that he will need the car for a family trip, but David is able to avoid it by telling him that the car is broken and he is waiting for a mechanic to come look at it. After work, David arrives home with a gift for Robert to apologize for overreacting the day before. He gives him a barbecue grill and the two agree to fire it up in the evening. Later at work, David calls Vanessa to check on her, and she informs him that a witness, an elderly lady who lives by the road, has come forward. In a panic, David calls Robert to tell him the news, telling him that the police haven't seen her yet but will do so today, prompting Robert to pump the brakes in the middle of the road. He instructs David to find out what they know and rushes to the old lady's house. He informs Mrs. Petrov that her test results have arrived and that she is severely deficient in magnesium, and that he must administer a magnesium injection to her. Meanwhile, David goes to Vanessa's house to find out what she knows. While they are talking, she receives a phone call from Detective Rain informing her that the witness has died of a heart attack. Vanessa is devastated to hear the news. After leaving, David immediately calls Robert to give him the unbelievable news. Robert pretends to be surprised and excited to hear the news, then asks David when he'll be over to fire up the grill, but David informs him that he won't be able to make it because he has to work late due to a deadline. At night, Robert heads over to David's workplace looking for David. He runs into Grant, who informs him that David left for dinner half an hour ago and is expected to return to finish his work. Before Robert walks out, he insists on leaving him the food, telling Grant to enjoy the food while it's still hot. On the way, he is upset to see David and Vanessa having dinner at a nearby restaurant. When they leave the restaurant, David is shocked to see that someone vandalized his car. He offers Vanessa a ride home, but she declines, claiming that she lives nearby. As Vanessa walks home, she is followed by Robert. When she realizes she is being followed, she rushes home and gets inside as soon as possible. The next morning, David joins Vanessa at a memorial for Janine, where a friend plays the guitar and each person shares a positive memory of Janine. When he returns home, Robert is waiting on his front porch. He is enraged that David is seeing Vanessa. He informs David that the girl is dead and that he is playing therapist with the sister. He wants David to stop seeing her because it is endangering them both. At work, Grant notices that David is not himself and inquires about his performance with one of the supervisors, who informs him that David has missed a couple of deadlines. When David leaves work, Vanessa is downstairs waiting and wants to know why David isn't returning any of her phone calls. David tells her that they can't do this anymore, but when Vanessa goes in for a kiss, he is unable to resist. Grant receives a phone call from the police, inquiring about the stolen car report on his car. He is taken aback by the news and rushes to see David. When he arrives, he yells for David but receives no response, so he walks to the garage to check on the car, where he is greeted by Robert. Later that night, David ends up spending the night with Vanessa as Robert stalks them from below. The next morning, while renting kayaks, David returns to find Robert chatting with Vanessa. Robert introduces himself as David's friend, and as Vanessa leaves to get in the kayak, David wants to know what the hell he's doing there. As they paddle away, Robert follows them. David asks him to respect their privacy. As Robert turns away, he inquires whether it is a special occasion. Vanessa informs him that she used to do this with her sister that passed away. When she tells him that she was hit by a car, Robert tells her that it's the girl from the news and he can't believe someone would leave her on the side of the road to die like an animal, which upsets Vanessa and she speeds away on her kayak. Robert knocks David's paddle in the water and hurries after Vanessa. As they both paddle to catch up, her kayak flips over when she crosses over a tree in the river. When David catches up with Robert, he is forced to jump in and pretend to save her before being pulled out by David. As David gets out of the water, he confronts Robert and asks why he insulted Vanessa, but Robert tells him that he killed her sister and it is he who is insulting her. Robert apologizes after David tells him that he has everything under control. Upon returning home, they find Detective Rain and her partner waiting for them. They question David about his whereabouts the night of the hit and run. When David informs them that he was at the club, Detective Rain inquires whether he met Janine. David denies seeing her, but when Detective Rain informs them that a call was made from his phone to Janine that night, Vanessa is shocked. David tells them that he met a girl that gave him her phone number, but had no idea it was the same girl from the hit and run. When asked how he got home, he tells Detective Rain that he took the train at midnight. He informs Detective Rain that he was with Robert that night and he can verify his story. Upon hearing everything, Vanessa leaves in a hurry. At night, Vanessa goes to the bar where Janine was the night she was killed, in an effort to learn more information. While waiting for the train to return home, she is shocked to hear by a construction worker that the train stops running at 10 p.m. for construction and has been that way for a month. She rushes to confront David about his story of taking the train that night, but she's met by Robert. She informs him about the train not working past 10, as she tries to leave she is tackled to the ground by Robert. When David gets home, he calls Vanessa, but Robert answers her phone and remains silent as David tries to persuade her to talk to him. When David says he wants to talk to her about her sister, Robert hangs up the phone. At work, David is informed that no one can reach Grant and that their meeting has been rescheduled, but when David notices the lunch bag left by Robert, he immediately recognizes Robert's involvement. Later, Robert makes an anonymous call to the police and informs them of the car's location. As David makes his way to Vanessa's house, he receives a phone call from Vanessa, but is surprised to hear Robert on the other end. He tells David that he's taking Vanessa fishing before hanging up the phone. When Robert's phone call ends, David rushes off to their fishing spot. Meanwhile, the police pull the BMW and Grant's body from the lake. At the cabin, Robert tries to kill Vanessa with a blow to the head with the kayak paddle, but he leaves the paddle as bait for David. When David arrives, he attacks Robert, knocking him to the ground. As he crawls away, he picks up the paddle and is about to swing on Robert when he is stopped by Detective Rain and the police. Robert yells that he tried to stop him but he killed her with the paddle. While Detective Rain questions Robert, the medics inform her that they have a pulse and she is breathing. As David gets escorted to the police car, he sees Vanessa being loaded in the ambulance. When Robert learns that the girl is alive, he knows it's only a matter of time before he's arrested, so he ties the anchor to his legs and throws it into the lake, pulling him to the bottom. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe for more videos.